Welcome to you all. This is the final presentation of Anne Baring's course, The Long Journey to a New Story, The Evolution of Civilizations, Cultures and Consciousness, hosted by Ubiquity University. Today, I would like to read the words of John O'Donoghue, and the poem is in this book. And I really thought that his words are connected to today's presentation, because this is about the new beginning. In out-of-the-way places of the heart, where your thoughts never think to wander, this beginning has been quietly forming, waiting until you were ready to emerge. For a long time, it has watched your desire, feeling the emptiness growing inside you, noticing how you willed yourself on, still unable to leave what you had outgrown. It watched you play with the seduction of safety and the gray promises that sameness whispered, heard the waves of turmoil rise and relent, wondered, would you always live like this? Then the delight, when your courage kindled and out you stepped onto new ground, your eyes young again with energy and dream, a path of plenitude opening before you. Though your destination is not yet clear, you can trust the promise of this opening. Unfurl yourself into the grace of beginning that is at one with your life's desire. Awaken your spirit to adventure, hold nothing back, learn to find ease in risk. Soon you will be home in a new rhythm, for your soul senses the world that awaits you.
That's lovely, Georgie. Thank you.
And now let's hear from you about the rise of science and technology and a dominance of the old story and awakening to a new story.
Okay. The dawning realization that we participate in a cosmic reality that is the source and ground of our own lives is challenging the belief advanced by science that we exist on a tiny planet in a lifeless universe and that there is no life beyond death. It may be that the universe has waited eons for us to reach the point where more than a handful of individuals could awaken to awareness of the invisible ground that animates and supports the whole of our existence. Like the giant UFO in the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind, an immense invisible field of consciousness is making itself known to us, asking to be recognized by us, embraced by us. We might call it the soul of the cosmos. Now, I think I'd like to introduce the idea that we've come from spirit. I think this is a story that I've been giving, is a story of our long journey from the stars and our return to the stars. So there's a double journey. We've come this far, as it were, from the stars, and we're on our way back. So I want you to have this idea of a double journey, if you like, that has taken us probably millions of years. We've probably come from other star systems that we're not aware of yet. And I like Kabbalah. I like the diagram of the tree of life, because I think more than any other religious teaching, I think it gives us the idea of where we've come from. It has 4 basic levels, although those 4 are subdivided into many more. But at the top level, or the innermost level, is the highest world, as it were, the divine world, the world of emanation from which everything comes forth. Then we have the world of creation, which is in pale blue in the middle there. And then the world of formation, which is the archetypal world, where the imprint, as it were, of everything that we are has come from. And finally, we have the manifest material world that we live in. So it's good to carry an image within oneself of these different levels of reality, and to know that really we're in touch with the deepest level all the time, even though we seem to be so cut off from it. Now, there have been 4 main phases of belief. the great mother of the Paleolithic and Neolithic eras that I did in my second talk, when the close interweaving of seen and unseen worlds that is still found in shamanic societies today. Then we have the Bronze Age and later, and the worship of many goddesses and gods who personified the archetypal powers of the unseen world. And these are still worshipped in India. Thirdly, we have the Iron Age, where the great father god of the three patriarchal religions and the separation of spirit and nature, creator and creation, and the loss of divine immanence. And finally, we have our present age of scientific rationalism or materialism, where there is no transcendent dimension of reality, only material reality. Now, the focus of solar culture was the key theme really of this whole solar era is about freedom and transcendence. It's about reaching up towards the spirit, up to the sun and the light, freeing humanity from the shackles of belief that restrict its creative spirit. From the 15th century onwards, this led to the discoveries of science and to the revolutionary ideas about justice and human rights, which have transformed all our lives. And the key myth of solar culture is the struggle of the hero to explore and discover, to know and to understand. And this has led through the phase of trying to dominate and control nature. Women, as I explained last time or the time before, were associated with chaotic nature, and therefore they had to be controlled by man, or so man thought. And this phase is now thankfully passing, and woman is becoming the partner of man. We've been through a great revolution in my lifetime. When I look back on my mother's life or my grandmother's life, it's totally different from the kind of relationship that I have with my husband. Now, this is a quote from Richard Tarnas in his book, his first book, The Passion of the Western Mind. He said, "The evolution of the Western mind has been driven by the heroic impulse to forge an autonomous, rational human self by separating it from the primordial unity with nature. But to do this, the masculine mind had to repress the feminine. The evolution of the Western mind has been founded on the repression of the feminine, the repression of whatever the masculine mind defined as other." Now that old format is breaking down and has been breaking down for about 100 years, but it's going to take probably another 100 to really achieve what it needs to. So here I want to give you the idea, you've already had the first lunar phase and you've had the second solar phase, and now we're moving into the stellar phase, what the alchemists call the stellar phase, the final phase of evolution, if you like, where mind and soul are reunited. And we are reunited with the divine ground, having been separated from it for so long. I just want to give you that diagram because it's quite helpful to have an image to fasten onto when you're going through this material. Now, I come to the 16th century, which was absolutely amazing century from the point of view of these geniuses. The new story in the 16th century was the discoveries of these four brilliant men and the shift of focus from religion to science. All these men still believed in God and saw themselves exploring the mind of God as revealed in his universe. And they experienced their discoveries as a revelation of God's laws given to them by God, and they were awed by them and by what they discovered. The printing press had been discovered in 1450, and this allowed their ideas to reach a large educated community throughout Europe. They're just incredible men, and incredible that they existed at this time, which was so persecuted really by the church, and they still were able to get their ideas through with great difficulty, I may say. Now, the Netherlands in the 17th century was an extraordinary place because while Germany was swallowed up in the 30 Years' War, the Netherlands threw off the double yoke of Spain and the Catholic Church, and many highly educated scholars who were threatened by persecution fled to Amsterdam, and this city became an enlightened center of learning as well as an outstanding one for civic responsibility. If you ever go to Amsterdam, go to the Rijksmuseum and look at the great paintings, huge paintings of the worthies of the city, really, all wearing beautiful blue sashes and looking extremely engaged in making their city a wonderful place. And the beautiful house that became the home of Comenius, one of these great scholars, is now called the Embassy of the Free Mind, and is the repository of a priceless collection of Hermetic and alchemical manuscripts and illustrations. And there again, if you go to Amsterdam, go to that house and see this collection, because it's completely brilliant and marvelous. The Rosicrucian Enlightenment, which had hoped to lift all of Central Europe out of barbarism, was able to find a home there because it had to flee other places in Europe. And its founder was Christian Rosenkreutz. Nobody knows quite when he lived, but his ideas took root in Amsterdam. Now, Kepler wrote this: "There is nothing I want to find out and long to know with greater urgency than this. Can I find God, whom I can almost grasp with my own hands in looking at the universe, also in myself?" I think this was and is a supremely important question, and it's one that we should be asking ourselves now. What a wonderful face that is, so intelligent. Now, while science came to reject religion, the alchemists kept alive the lunar insight that within manifest life is a hidden reality of the highest order, and that spirit is hidden within matter and within man. This was known in Egypt and to the pre-Socratics in Greece. It was lost in Christianity because only Christ, as the Son of God, was divine. In a church council held in Constantinople in 869, Pope Nicholas I declared that man was no longer to be considered as a trichotomy of spirit, soul, and body. From this time on, the papal see was to deny the existence of the individual human spirit, declaring man to be but body and soul, and relegating the personal spirit to a mere intellectual quality within the soul itself. So henceforth, the dogmas of the church became the only recognized source of revelation. You couldn't have revelation coming from the individual. It was too threatening to the church. However, those four great men got through. Now, Newton was fascinated by alchemy, and you may not know, but three-fifths of his papers were about this subject. They have not yet been published because I don't think anybody can understand them enough to publish them. The idea of a mechanical clockwork universe that was attributed to Newton was anathema to him. This idea came from scientists in the 19th century who adopted his theories but removed their metaphysical foundation and his profound belief in God. They really eviscerated his true legacy. Now we come to the 17th to 19th centuries and the age of enlightenment, or the age of reason, and we learn about the waning of the old order, the old Christian order. Reason was to replace faith, and science was to replace religion. And you may remember that the goddess of reason was enthroned in Notre Dame in Paris, replacing the Virgin virtually. So we had these, I've just listed a few of these great minds of that time. There was Descartes, who had a tremendous influence on philosophy in the next 2 centuries. There was Voltaire, who was a prolific writer and philosopher. There was Thomas Paine, who wrote a marvelous book called The Rights of Man, published in 1791. There was Darwin, whose Origin of Species changed the whole basis of how we looked at ourselves and was a tremendous challenge to the idea of God creating the world, so to speak, because it gave a different origin, if you like, to our species. Then we had Nietzsche, and Jim has done a marvelous talk on Nietzsche, if not 2, I think. And we have Marx, finally, who wrote the Communist Manifesto with Engels in 1848, and later the Capital. So those are just, you can study these on your own, but I just wanted to sort of summarize the most influential people, intellectuals of that period. Thomas Paine's book, The Rights of Man, led to the American colonies declaring their independence from England in 1776, and also to the values enshrined in the American Constitution of 1789, and to this great statement: "We hold these truths to be self-evident." I always get emotional when I read this, "that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." I think every politician in the world should be told to read those out loud when he takes office. Now, the separation between spirit and nature that was deeply embedded in Christian theology and teaching was transmitted to science from the 16th century. By the 18th century, science had come to reject God and the soul as illusory creations of the religious and superstitious mind, and it also began to exclude and ridicule whatever it designated as non-rational. The waning of Christianity increased the growing influence of science because it filled the gap, so to speak. But by the 20th century, the result was that scientific rational man had come to rule supreme, a hubristic, one-eyed consciousness that was split off from nature and from soul. As science broke away from the control of the Catholic Church in the 16th century, it developed on the foundation of the long-established association between spirit and nature. Christian theology had long banished the idea of spirit being present in nature and matter by eradicating all vestiges of animism. Science was able to focus its attention on nature and matter and began to forge a path to the astounding discoveries that have revealed not only the process of evolution on Earth, but also the process of evolution in the universe, as well as the limitless size and complexity of the universe. But it had assimilated the idea that spirit was not present in nature or matter, and that the cosmos and matter were dead, inert, without life or intelligence. Thenceforth, with its growing emphasis on the rational mind, it was perhaps inevitable that the philosophy of scientific materialism would eliminate both God and the soul, since their existence couldn't be proven through the methodologies it had developed. Now, this is an interesting comment from one of Jung's followers, because he wrote that the breakdown of a central myth is like the shattering of a vessel containing a precious essence. The fluid is spilled and drains away, soaked up by the surrounded undifferentiated matter. Meaning is lost, and in its place, primitive and atavistic contents are reactivated. Differentiated values disappear and are replaced by the elemental motivations of power and pleasure, or else the individual is exposed to emptiness and despair. Now, this is so much what happened in the last century and also in this one that I thought it was worth quoting to you. So now we come to the 20th century, which was a century of enormous political changes, bloodshed, and suffering, because the vacuum left by the decline of Christianity in the West was soon filled by the ideologies that tore apart the 20th century. So first of all, we had the Russian Revolution, then the First and Second World Wars, the Maoist revolution in China, the horrific partition of India, the collapse of the Soviet Empire, the splitting of the atom and the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the rise of America as the dominant world power. Those are not necessarily in the right order. I just put them down in that way as they came to me, really. With the exception of the last entry, these revolutions and wars had devastating effects on vast numbers of people. The bombing of Hiroshima initiated a new era. Really, it divided the past from the future. It was so terrible an event, which people still survive to be speaking about. The picture of the bomb there is what was dropped, the hydrogen bomb that was dropped on Bikini Atoll. That was the first hydrogen bomb that they tested out in that area. And people are still suffering from the effects of it to this day. And Einstein said that with the unleashing of the power of the atom, everything has changed, save our mode of thinking, and thus we drift towards unparalleled catastrophes. He could see all the future coming because we hadn't really altered anything in the way we were thinking in our attitude to matter and to life. With nuclear fission, tremendous power was given into our hands, power that we were in no sense morally equipped to handle. The long-established belief that matter is dead rather than alive with spirit allowed us to split the atom and develop a dangerous technology which is leaving lethal residues of radioactivity on the Earth from some 2,000 nuclear explosions, as well as from the plutonium waste from 450 nuclear reactors. It has driven us to create ever more demonic weapons with which to perpetuate our addiction to war. As former presidential candidate Denis Kucinich said, the idea that by having nuclear weapons you make the world a safer place is essentially insane. Very few people consider the fact that with the proliferation of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction, we are confronting a pathology. It's not named as a pathology, which it is. So Jung, who foresaw all this and wrote about it in his book, I think it's volume 9, Civilization in Transition, he said that consciousness torn from its roots possesses a Promethean freedom, but it also partakes of the nature of a godless hubris, with the belief that nothing is greater than man and his deeds. And he also said, God's powers have passed into our hands. The powers themselves are not evil, but in the hands of man, they are an appalling danger, in evil hands. And this was a painting that he did, I think just around 1914, the beginning of the First World War, in which he calls it the spirit above a world of war and technology. So he could see where we were moving, and he could see that nothing could halt the events that were going to take place in the future. But he warned them, we warned people over and over again. He said, as at the beginning of the Christian era, so again today, we are faced with the problem of the general moral backwardness of our species, which has failed to keep pace with our scientific, technical, and social progress. We need more understanding of human nature, because the only real danger that exists is man himself. He is the great danger, and we are pitifully unaware of it. We know nothing of man, far too little. His psyche should be studied, because we are the origin of all coming evil. That's something that really hasn't got into the culture at all. There's very little understanding of the psyche, or of what I'm going to show you shortly. So what happened, inevitably, was this. We had 4 mass psychoses, 4 utopian ideologies. First of all, we had Mao in China, then Stalin in the Soviet Union, then Hitler in Germany, and finally we've had the psychosis of Islamic State, which has supposedly been defeated, but it hasn't been, because it will rise up again. It's too strong to have given up so easily. So despite the teaching of all religions about the sanctity of life, we can see that humanity as a whole is still morally unconscious, still easily drawn to follow ideologies promoted by psychopathic leaders and to accept their call to kill whoever they designate as their enemies. Now I'm getting deeper into the psychology of our unconscious, so to speak. There's a huge dragon there and a tiny hero trying to kill it, which is not going to succeed because it's much too big. You can't kill the instinct, you can only transform it. The dragon, like the dinosaur, personifies the immense power of our unconscious primordial instincts in relation to our conscious mind, illustrated here by the solar hero who is trying to kill it. The life of the individual counts for nothing when these unconscious forces break through the thin membrane of civilization, destroying everything in their path. Wait a second. Jung commented on these psychoses. Although contemporary man believes that he can change himself without limit, the astounding or rather terrifying fact remains that despite civilization and the influence of religions, he is still morally as much in bondage to his instincts as an animal, and can therefore fall victim at any moment to the beast within. Evil has its origins in the unconscious predator-prey pattern of behavior. It may be defined as the intention to inflict or the act of inflicting terror, suffering, humiliation, torture, or death on an individual or group of individuals. All it needs to constellate evil is for a psychopathic individual to trigger a mass psychosis in one group of people, projecting the enemy onto another group. And we've seen this happen over and over again. It's in danger of happening again in our time with what is happening in the Middle East at the moment, really. So we've seen this happen, as I said, again and again, in the 30 Years' War, in the French Revolution, and all the revolutions of the 20th century. Mao murdered 30 million people, Stalin probably 100 million, Hitler at least 6 million. The partition of India was an unmitigated catastrophe that destroyed the lives of millions of individuals. Islamic State has butchered thousands, and so has Assad in Syria. The life of the individual in all these psychoses has counted for nothing, as I've said before. So here I want to just show you a diagram I've made of what happens when the ego or the conscious mind is possessed by the primordial shadow. These powerful instincts that arise from the predator-prey pattern in our psychic depths. When these elements of the unconscious psyche are allied to a hugely inflated ego of the psychopath, say, with no boundaries and no moral capacity to distinguish between right and wrong, we have a psychopath who may lose all sense of morality and the evolutionary achievement of a conscious self. The people who blindly follow him are thrown back thousands of years, becoming an unconscious unit of the tribe, serving a depraved concept of deity or a depraved ideology. When thousands or even millions follow a psychopathic leader or are terrified into submission, we have a collective psychosis and millions die because of it. So that's the end of the psychological insight part of my talk. And now we'll move on to scientism, which is the name that's been given to the materialist or reductionist science, starting in the late 18th century, which has told us that we're the only sentient beings in an inanimate universe that is without meaning, purpose, direction, or intelligence. The result was that by the 20th century, the rational mind had pretty well replaced God in a secular society. A hubristic, one-eyed consciousness split off from nature and from soul. And Yuval Harari, in his book Homo Deus, really summed it up when he said, "Life has no script, no playwright, no producer, and no meaning." We have to ask, what has this belief system done to our soul and to the values that had their foundation in religious beliefs that acknowledged an overarching deity and respect for life and for others? The four main tenets of scientific materialism are these. The physical material universe is the only one that exists. Consciousness begins and ends with the physical brain. When the brain dies, consciousness ceases to exist. There is no such thing as the soul. The whole universe is basically a mechanism that came into being by chance. And we are alone in a randomly created, uncaring universe that has no conscious beings in it apart from ourselves. And we as observers are separate from what we observe. And these beliefs were held by the late Stephen Hawking, who really, up to the time of his death, really thought that would be the end of his consciousness. And of course, the people who followed him and worshipped him, because he was a fantastic scientist, they took on his beliefs naturally. And that's the problem, really. People follow their leaders. So here I've taken this picture of the Cyclops by Odilon Redon, where we have a one-eyed giant gazing out over a beautiful landscape which holds the figure of a naked woman. No image illustrates more eloquently the current dissociation of our rational conscious mind and its one-eyed vision from the deeper matrix of our soul and its different way of knowing. World culture is now enthralled to this one-eyed consciousness. Now here we have a diagram of the brain hemispheres, and I'm going to mention a marvelous book by Ian McGilchrist, which some of you may know already, called The Master and His Emissary, The Divided Brain and the Making of the Western Mind. I'm not going to explain it because it's too complex, and there's a very funny video that he's made, a sort of cartoon video, which will explain it far better than I could. And I've put it in my notes so that you'll be able to find it on the internet. And he said in that cartoon video, he said, quoted Einstein, "The intuitive mind is a sacred gift. The rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift." And that's Einstein put his finger on it precisely. That's what's happened. Because of the pervasive influence of materialist science, we have come to see ourselves as separate from the life that surrounds us. The methodology of Western science is based on objective analysis, which separates the observer from the observed. It has to do that. That's what it's meant to do. Life is viewed as a mechanism that can be manipulated rather than an organism that we are part of. In every sense, we have become increasingly mechanized in our thinking. From the 18th century on, this scientific separation of the knower from the known has become deeply embedded in the ruthless politics and economics of the industrialized nations. We see governments pursuing their own power-driven agendas, competing against each other instead of serving their people and the planet. And that's because this belief system has kind of got infiltrated into politics and economics. So people don't think of anything beyond them rather than what they can achieve immediately in going after their goals. Seeing all aspects of the world and the universe as separate from ourselves has led to a catastrophic loss of soul and a loss of relationship with the planetary environment. Technological progress, scientific advance, the acquisition of wealth and political and corporate power have become the supreme goals. Being told that we live in a mechanical, dead, soulless universe has deprived millions of a deeper meaning and value to their lives. So we have depression, drug addiction, and suicide, increasing all of them. As a result of that, the costs to society are really enormous. I think there were 68 million prescriptions for depression in England last year. 68 million, and America will be probably 10 times as much. The dehumanizing materialism of reductionist science provides no foundation for moral values. Science and technology are dreaming of unimaginable power over life, but they have no moral boundaries to guide or restrain them. And we can already clearly see this in the amorality of the internet giants, particularly Facebook and Instagram, which have led to people committing suicide and young people committing suicide in this country because they put up material on it which encourages people to do that. Science did not embrace the idea of the further development of human consciousness and the higher states of mind that have been long known to the metaphysical traditions of the East, I don't know whether this is deliberate or just plain ignorance, but it's something that they shouldn't really have excluded from their understanding of life. So I come to the myth of Prometheus, who stole the fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. And this is the myth that drives science and technology, and also the idea of perpetual growth and progress. Since the 18th century, there has been a Promethean energy driving Western civilization. This energy has been directed at the long struggle to overcome whatever has impeded the progress of humanity, the great quest for freedom and enlightenment, the struggle against tyranny and slavery, against the oppression of women and the sexual abuse of children. It drives the struggle to bring education to the still illiterate masses of the world, to lift people out of poverty and misery, to improve their physical and mental health by medical advances, to help in an infinite number of ways. This energy has been harnessed to the incredible discoveries of the great explorers in every field, including the Hubble telescope, which has revealed to us the limitless dimensions of the universe. It has led to the sublime creations of the men who designed and built the great Gothic cathedrals, although that came earlier, and those of poets, artisans, and great musicians. It has led to the tremendous scientific discoveries of men like Copernicus and Galileo, Newton and Einstein. But it has also led to the lethal power of our weapons of mass destruction that now threaten us with annihilation. In creating these weapons, we have indeed stolen the fire of the gods from heaven. So we are on the wrong path, and we've been on it for centuries. We've forgotten our relationship with the inner life of the cosmos. We have lost the relationship with the planet and the sacred order of the cosmos that millennia ago we once had. Only the indigenous peoples with shamanic traditions have maintained a relationship with both, particularly with the earth as mother. For decades, they have been calling out to us to look at what we are doing to the earth and to leave the dangerous and unconscious path we are on before it is too late. Now, the religions of the world have taught us to believe in a transcendent creator God, but they have not told us about our essential divinity and our profound connection with the universe. Science has taught us that our potential and destiny are limited to the material universe and our present state of consciousness. Neither has told us what our purpose on this planet is. Both have created a kind of prison in which we have lived unconsciously for millennia, believing what we were told. So Rumi said, "Why do you stay in prison when the doors are open?" Why do you stay in prison when the doors are open? Wonderful phrase. So now we're faced with four major threats. Climate change, which apparently, according to the scientists, we've got 10 years really to bring things round. Nuclear war, which could happen at any minute. Population growth, which is exceeding the possibilities of the planet to sustain us. And technological insanity, and the idea that we can create robots who would replace us and be more intelligent than we are. I could spend more time on that, but I can't really. So will we survive these, or will we perish through our inability to recognize the need to change course? And a great scientist called Michio Kaku has said this: of all the generations of humans that have walked the surface of the earth for 100,000 years, going back to when we first left Africa, the generation now alive is the most important. The generation now alive, the generation that you see looking around you for the first time in history, is the generation that controls the destiny of the planet itself. What we do in the next 10 years is crucial. We face the greatest challenge humanity has faced since the time of the two great cataclysms of 12,800 and 11,700 years ago. So that's really something. It's quite terrifying. I sometimes lay awake thinking about it at night. What about my daughter and my grandchild? How are they going to cope with this change that's coming? Now, I found this wonderful or awful quote really in the Essene Gospel of Peace, which some of you may know. There are 4 books, and the 4th is perhaps the most remarkable. some of them contain the actual words that Jesus spoke, which are in the Gospels. So whether he was an Essene, brought up with the Essene community at Qumran, we can't be sure, but certainly he drew on the Essene teaching in what he was giving out. And so they say this is the prophecy. There will come a day when the Son of Man will turn his face from his earthly mother and betray her, even denying his mother and his birthright. Then shall he sell her into slavery, and her flesh shall be ravaged, her blood polluted, and her breath smothered. He will bring the fire of death into all parts of her kingdom, and his hunger will devour all her gifts, and leave in their place only a desert. All these things he will do out of ignorance of the law, and as a man dying slowly cannot smell his own stench, so will the Son of Man be blind to the truth, that as he plunders and ravages and destroys his earthly mother, so does he plunder and ravage and destroy himself. For he was born of his earthly mother, and he is one with her, and all that he does to his mother, even so he does to himself. That's really powerful and really shakes one, I think. So here I tried to find fireworks to illustrate the news story, and this was the best I could come up with from Google. But it gives the idea of this explosive, really new something or other coming into being, I hope. The news story is a revolutionary shift in collective thinking, the same kind of shift as when Copernicus, Galileo, and Kepler displaced the geocentric model of the sun. I have to get rid of these silly emails. Displaced the model of the sun and moon revolving around the earth. Because just as our sun does not revolve around the earth, neither does the life of the earth revolve around our species. We are dependent on the environment that sustains us. And if we destroy that environment, we destroy ourselves. Now, the news story is coming from quantum physics, from science. Not the scientism science, but the true, authentic science. Quantum physics tells us that the whole universe is a unified field, a cosmic web of life which connects all life forms in our universe. Every atom of life interacts with every other atom. None of us is truly separate from others or from other species of life on the planet, or from the life of the 2,000 billion galaxies of the universe, each of which has 100 billion stars. What we do to the life around us and to each other affects us all, and we are literally our brother's keeper. We've just heard that the bees in England are dying out, so there's no way of the crops being fertilized. And without the bees, we can't really produce food. And I think this is happening in Germany and Europe as well, I've heard. So this is one example of the harm that we've been doing to nature. Through a vast network of electromagnetic fields, we are connected to the Earth, the Sun, and the distant galaxies. So we are not separate from any aspect of planetary or cosmic life. This is illustrated in the Hindu tradition by the beautiful image of the net of Indra. It can be imagined as a shining golden net surrounding our planet and connecting all forms of life on it. But it also embraces not only planetary life, but all galactic life in the cosmos. Through this shimmering web of light, all existence, whether seen or unseen, is an indissoluble unity. We are not only in this incandescent web of light, we are a creative part of it, contributing to it with our own lives. The astounding discoveries of quantum physics tell us that we are literally bathed in a sea of light, invisible to us, yet permeating every cell of our being. We are not only connected with each other through the astonishing reach of the internet, but through the infinitesimal particles of subatomic matter. In our essence, we are beings of light, cosmic beings. As long ago as the 6th century BC, Parmenides said, We are divine beings having a human experience. It is an utter tragedy that people have no awareness of their innate divinity. In fact, Pythagoras said, "Take courage, for the human race is divine." At the quantum level, all apparently separate aspects of life are connected in one invisible and indivisible whole. And we, as observers, are not separate from what we are observing. At the deepest level, all life is essentially one. Through the emerging science of unified physics, a new cosmology is being born, a new vision of our profound relationship with an intelligent, living, and interconnected universe. This new story tells us that matter cannot be separated from spirit. Not only that, but at every level of existence, from the microscopic to the supergalactic, the same geometric principles bring all things into manifestation. That's a tremendous statement, which I can't go into because I'm not qualified to. All that we see and touch and believe is solid matter, is in fact vibrating energy. So I've got some quotes here about this. Einstein said, "Concerning matter, we've all been wrong. What we've called matter is really energy, whose vibration has been lowered as to be perceivable to the senses. There is no matter. There is only light and sound." And Max Planck said, "There is no matter as such. All matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force which brings the particles of an atom to vibration and holds the most minute solar system of the atom together. We must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter." And again he said, "I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything that we talk about, everything that we regard as existing, postulates consciousness." Quantum physicists discovered that physical atoms are made up of infinitesimal vortices of energy that are constantly spinning and vibrating, each one radiating its own unique energy signature. So we are beings of energy and vibration, radiating our own unique energy signature as well. This needs a lot of thinking about, but I brought those diagrams to give this idea of the vibration fields of energy. I'm going to give you some more quotes, quite a few, which you can go back to afterwards and think about, perhaps, if you're interested. This one from Dr. Ibn Alexander, who had an extraordinary near-death experience. He nearly died under surgery, and his experience during that time he's put into a book, can't remember the name of it, and his second book is Living in a Mindful Universe. And he said, "Consciousness is fundamental in the universe, not derivative from physical matter. All of the apparent physical world exists within consciousness. We are all manifestations of the one mind, the primordial consciousness in which all the events of the universe occur." Consciousness is ultimate reality. Physical universes and their components, including the brain, emerge from consciousness. All beings in the manifest universe are related to each other, never separate from God, nature, or any other being for an instant. And that's from Paul Haig, who is writing a book called The Theory of Everything. He lives in Sweden, a most extraordinary man. And David Bohm, the greatest physicist who used to live in the United Kingdom, wrote, "The universe is an undivided wholeness in flowing movement." And he also said that, oh dear, what did he say about light? All matter is frozen light. And this morning, somebody sent me an email to tell me that somebody called Marcello Gleiser, who's a theoretical physicist, has just won the Templeton Prize of this year. And he says, he wrote, "Atheism is inconsistent with the scientific method. The more we know, the more mystery there is. Science becomes a spiritual conversation with the mysterious. So beautiful that. Anyway, he's going to go up in the world and he'll have a great influence, I hope, on science. The universe is not a collection of objects, but is an inseparable web of vibrating energy patterns in which no one component has reality independently from the entirety. Included in the entirety is the observer. This was written maybe 25, even 30 years ago by Paul Davis. And I cut it out of a newspaper because I thought it was so extraordinary. The entire universe is an interdependent system that is co-arising with everything else at each moment. In this co-arising process, we participate directly with the world beyond our physical body. And that beautiful crop circle appeared in England about in 2001, I think. It had 450 circles and it appeared overnight, so there's no way that anybody could possibly have made it. It's the most beautiful one that I've ever seen. I put it there. That in itself is a phenomenon of our time that we should have paid more attention to. No, wait a minute, I've lost my place. All we see and touch, I've done that. Yeah, the electromagnetic quantum vacuum is a form of light. It's important to remember this image of light. It is an underlying sea of energy that permeates every tiny volume of space, from the emptiest intergalactic void to the depths of the earth, the sun, and our own bodies. Our world of matter is like the visible foam atop a very deep ocean of light. Scientists now know that particles are non-locally connected with each other throughout space. Living things of all kinds are non-locally connected throughout a subtle field that scientists know exists, although they don't yet understand what it is or how it works. This may be dark matter that they've been trying to investigate for some time now, and dark energy. And this again from Dr. Ibn Alexander. Materialist science is at the end of its days, as most scientists are changing their views. The old concepts are soon to be relegated to the same dustbin as the earth is flat, as we develop a more mature understanding and transcend old beliefs. There have been so many people who have had near-death experiences, of which he is one, that they also, because of what they're saying and writing and speaking, they're also changing our concept of what happens beyond death and our consciousness, where it can go to, so to speak. So there's a lot happening that's reaching many thousands of people. So awakening to a new story, in my view, means moving towards a new image of God or spirit that includes nature, matter, and all planetary life, and indeed all cosmic life. It means recovering what we've lost, the very ancient understanding that the universe has a soul, an intelligence, and that spirit is present in every particle of matter, every stone, flower, tree, or blade of grass, every one of the 100 million atoms of the miraculous organism of our body. As we begin to comprehend this new story, the realization is dawning that we are participating in a cosmic consciousness or intelligence, which is present in every particle of matter. God or spirit or divine mind is not something transcendent to us, separate from us. We are within it, coexisting with it, even though our consciousness is still so limited or incomplete, still unaware that we carry divinity within every cell of our being. Our physical body, the vehicle of spirit in this dimension of reality, is part of this divinity. And this, I believe, is one of the great revelations of our time, which I hope will come through to thousands of people on the planet, changing our image of God. So I've put here about the soul is the cosmic sea of being, or web of life underlying physical reality, through which all things are connected to each other. The soul is the source or matrix of consciousness, the invisible great mother, once named as Sophia, as Shekinah, as divine wisdom and Holy Spirit. The soul is not so much in us, we are in the soul. Our physical body and brain are the vehicle of the soul in this dimension of reality. These wonderful words of Heraclitus: you could not discover the limits of the soul, even if you traveled by every path in order to do so. So profound is its meaning. So divine spirit is the core of our being, and the soul is intermediary between spirit and body. The body is the temple of the soul and the means of our being able to incarnate on this planet in the material dimension. At the same time, it is a portal that can offer access to the many dimensions of the inner universe and the experience of the divine ground, as many people who have done meditation for years have realized. And the new story invites a different understanding of death. Nothing is more important for our balance, well-being, and trust in life than to know that when we die, we move into another reality that is as real and vitally alive as this one. So much grief and suffering is caused by the belief that life and consciousness end with the death of the physical brain. We need to know that we are immortal beings. Consciousness does not die with the death of the physical body. Consciousness is eternal. We are reunited with those we love, and we move on to doing much more work in those other dimensions. Our work is not finished when we leave this planet. Whatever interests us, we can go on with when we're in these other dimensions. Now I put here my favorite pictures again. That picture on the left, when I was traveling in my age 25 all over the Far East, I had a marvelous job collecting photographs of art from all the museums of Asia. And in the museum in Bangkok, the museum director gave me a photograph of this marvelous figure of the Buddha. And the meaning of that came to me in a great dream that I had many, many years ago that's in my book, The Dream of the Cosmos. But what it means is that the Buddha is sitting on the coils of the great serpent, Musalinda he's called, or she is called. And he's blessed by that great serpent because he has raised consciousness from the purely instinctive level to the highest level that it's capable of reaching in the human state. And he said that I will not rest until I have brought all beings out of the sea of samsara. He's working in the other dimensions to bring us out of this sea of ignorance and confusion that we're in at the moment. And the figure of Christ also is so eloquent with the sleeping soldiers, which really represent all the warlike games that we play when we're really sound asleep, when we're unconscious. And I think the awakened state is really the awareness of the underlying unity of all aspects and forms of life. So two of these great teachers have taught us how to raise our primordial instincts to the awakened state, symbolized here by the great serpent whose 7 hoods protect the Buddha seated on its coils, and by the figure of the Christ rising from the tomb above the sleeping soldiers. They did not ask for belief and worship, but for the transformation of human consciousness, still unconsciously in bondage to primordial instincts, into the awakened and enlightened states that they embody. So I'm reaching the end now. I've put here the highest values as I see them and as I think these great teachers have taught them, that we should really try to emulate in everything we do, in the way we live our lives. And these are wisdom, compassion, love, justice, beauty and harmony, and the instinct to heal, to nurture, protect, and cherish, as we do with our children or our parents or our friends or anybody that we're in touch with whom we really love, to take that love into the world, to expand it, to include all of nature, all of humanity, all of the suffering. Now, I have a great friend called Christopher Bache, who wrote a book called Dark Night, Early Dawn, some years ago, which I put many quotes into my book, The Dream of the Cosmos. And he has written another one called Diamonds from Heaven, that's going to be published this year, which gives a record of his journey into the deep mind of the universe. And this is one of the passages which I particularly love. I saw humanity climbing out of a valley, and just ahead, on the other side of the mountain peak, and beyond our present sight, was a brilliant, sun-drenched world that was about to break over us. The time frame was enormous. After millions of years of struggle and ascent, we were poised on the brink of a sunrise that would forever change the conditions of life on this planet. All current structures would quickly become irrelevant. All truths would quickly be rendered passé. Truly, a new epoch was dawning. The lives of everyone living on the edge of this pivotal time in history had been helping to bring about this global shift. It's just so beautiful and so hopeful, that passage. So the new story tells us that light and love are the foundation of the entire universe, and therefore the foundation of our being, our consciousness, our intelligence, and our capacity for love. We share in the love and light of the whole universe. This is where it comes from, within us, from that deep ground. The new story is about relinquishing the fear of death, knowing that we survive death, that in our essence we are immortal beings. Now, I think I've got time for just one more slide, which I'd put in. I didn't realize I would have time for it. But these are the different planes that we inhabit as we progress towards the divine ground. So at the moment, down below, the first lower one, we're in the plane of Earth, which is a denser material reality, which has a lower vibrational rate, as Einstein said. And this is what the Buddhas called samsara, because it's a state where we don't know really who we are, but we have to discover who we are and change and move upwards. So then we come to the intermediary plane of subtle forms, which is the soul world of multiple dimensions, which exist at a higher vibrational rate, which we can't see because we're at a lower one, which is maddening. They may be able to see us, but we can't see them. And finally, we have the plane of pure light beyond form, the angelic intelligences and the divine ground at the highest vibrational rate, to which one could give the name nirvana. So these are stages of consciousness, stages of being, stages that we inhabit, stages that the greatest sages on our planet have opened their psyche to and become aware of. The great mystics of all traditions, the Sufi mystics, the Christian mystics, the Hindu mystics, the Chinese mystics, all of them had access to this divine ground through opening their sensitivity to its existence. So I think I've said all I need to say, and I hope that you have taken on some of this and that you can go back over it and study it in the future if you want to. So thank you all very much for listening. And Georgie, thank you. So now I will exit myself.
Thank you, Anne. Well,
stop share. There we are.
Thank you, Anne. Well, my most heartfelt gratitude and appreciation to you. Wow, these 4 presentations to me seemed like I'm sitting in a movie theater and watching the history and evolution of humankind. I just really hope it, not that it ends well, but rather it continues well. Wow, and also throughout today, I was having all sorts of shivers going through my body and my whole being. Just everything was so beautiful. Thank you. Just listening to your voice, to your wisdom, and the knowledge. And this is who we are. This is what you presented. So I have 2 quick questions because I'm sure that some of our audience would like to ask questions from you. This is from your book on page 525. You say that the universe we see and marvel at is brought into being and sustained by light and love. We sail the fragile vessel of our consciousness on the surface of this fathomless sea of light and love, not knowing that we are in essence what we seek. the secret intention of the life that lives us, the secret dream of the cosmos, is to bring us to the discovery that we belong to this divine ground, that we are it, even though we have no awareness of it. The temple of our body is created and sustained by this ground. When the body dies, our consciousness discovers its identity with this eternal ground. So beautifully said, thank you. I'd like to put the emphasis on the seeking. We are seeking ourselves, and just if we segue back to a couple of sessions ago when we were talking about that survival is the strongest instinct in ourselves, that could it be that this seeking is also very, very strong within? And why is it that humankind in general, not everybody for sure, we're just so afraid of discovering ourselves? We do everything and anything but avoid discovering who we are. Why are we so afraid of this?
Well, because we're not taught that this exists, so we don't seek it unless we have a life experience that wakes us up. My life experience was traveling to the Far East and seeing the fantastic art of those different countries, and also having certain experiences and certain dreams. But if I hadn't had those, I'd be still sound asleep. So I was very lucky, and I tried to do the best I can to bring into being so that other people can also share this search, really, this quest. That's what the quest for the Grail was all about in the Middle Ages. And we really need a new quest for the Grail in our time to search out the missing meaning in people's lives, why they commit suicide, because they can find no meaning, no value, no worth in their own lives, which is tragic, particularly young people in their teens who commit suicide. We have a lot of it in England at the moment. And also we have a lot of murders, people killing people for no reason whatever, just because they have a knife and they want to stick it into somebody's back. Unbelievable, really. So we have a collapse of moral values, definitely. But that in itself can be a stimulus to change, and a stimulus to people to say, what are we doing? Why have we got this dreadful culture where our children are dying, you know? Why is the internet promoting this idea of suicide as something wonderful and good? So questions are being raised now, and that's part of the growing unfolding, really, of this new story. I think that's part of it.
Yeah, it is what you and Erwin Laszlo and other great messengers are talking about, that shifting consciousness.
Yeah.
Really. But then again, as you say, there's so many people have this undeveloped consciousness. They wouldn't be even open to these messages, that who we really are and what is our history and where are we going, because they just,
they would just laugh, or they would just say, well, that's silly old woman, she's mad.
Right. My next question is actually connected to the first one, and it is in a Paul Levy book that you kindly suggested, The Quantum Revelation. And any of you who haven't read it, please, it's just fantastic. Really, really fantastic. One of the books that I was underlining so much on almost every page. And this is on page 61. He says that we live in a self-observing universe, where we are the instruments through which the universe becomes aware of its creative nature. The question then becomes, how do we hold up a mirror to ourselves when we ourselves are the mirror? For we are simultaneously the mirror, the light it reflects, and the eyes that see the reflection. Everything is part of one unified quantum system, with no separation to be found anywhere. And John Wheeler said that we form what forms us. Now, my question is really related to when you were talking about that, how humans shifted from the lunar era to the solar era. And I had a question from you, and that wasn't public, but it still percolates in my mind, that when I was asking that why did we leave that amazing progress to go into something that is the wrong path? And you said that maybe we are programmed. So just reflecting what Paul Levy said, that we form what forms us. So do you see that there is this path we need to take evolutionary in order to augment our consciousness and realize that's who we are and what precious state we are in, what precious planet we are on? Otherwise we're just going to go extinct.
Yes, I think we are at a crossroads, definitely. If we don't make this choice, and the way it's coming in is to protect the environment. And the people like David Attenborough, who doing these wonderful programs, are waking people up to the fact of the plastic is killing the fish and that kind of thing. So there's that level of being woken up. Then there's the other level of personal experience or what's happening in society, depression, etc., and all the things I just mentioned. So there are different avenues through which this waking up can come. But I think we went wrong after the pre-Socratics, because unfortunately after them, Athens got completely tied up with the idea of war. And that's where they went. They lost the pre-Socratic vision, and they got into the power thing. And then that was going all over the Middle East as well. And we've been in the power thing ever since. We've constructed this image of reality in which we live, thinking that it's real, when in fact it's a construct.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that we've created through the things that we've done and believed and thought. A great deal of wrong was done by the Christian church, as I've said before, and it's a bit of a bee in my bonnet, I'm afraid, but it also by other churches and other religions who missed the point. They missed the evolutionary idea that it was not to believe, but to actually develop a deeper understanding of life. So they were mistaken as well. They missed the boat, as it were. But maybe they'll come back on board. I don't know. But certainly, I think it depends on the individual now, because it's not going to come from politicians. It's not going to come from the church. It's not going to come from science. It's going to come from different groups of individuals all over the world saying we can't tolerate this situation anymore. We have to do this, that, and the other. We have to, I don't know what really, but we have to change our ways of behavior. We have to find another fuel to replace fossil fuel. That's one of the main things that we need to do in a practical sense. And there have been people working on this all over the world, I know, but the big oil companies obviously want to stop it and will do everything in their power to stop it. So there again, we've constructed the reality of fossil fuels and we think we have to go on with it, but we don't have to. And the minute we realize we don't have to, something new will come up. Some discovery will be made by somebody somewhere in the world, in China or India or somewhere, and we'll have a new form of fuel. Or maybe we'll do without cars. I just don't know what's going to happen. There's something else I thought of as I was talking then. I mustn't go on too long. No, you go on, Georgie.
Well, you know, I would have like gazillions of questions from you, but I know we need to leave the platform for others. And I can see Jim Garrison's hand. Come on, Jim. Tell us.
Where's Jim? There he is. Hello, Jim.
Hello.
Hi,
can you hear me?
Hi, Jim.
Yes.
Hi, Anne. Hi, Georgie. Hi, everyone. So good to hear you. I'm sorry this is your final session, Anne. I am feeling a little bereft that it's drawing to a close, but it was a very warm-hearted closing, and I wanted to just add one thing to the texture of your remarks and get your comment. When you, in one of your slides, when you were talking about sort of the kind of the mass psychoses of the 20th centuries with, you know, the Nazis and the Bolsheviks and the Maoists, and then you added, you know, the Islamic State as the fourth category. I would make just an observation, you know, that the Hitler, Stalin, and Mao killed people by the tens of millions.
Yeah, that's true.
And the Islamic State, for all its ferocity, has been no more than maybe a couple thousand, not even as much as, you know, the amount of people that are killed in automobile accidents, and certainly not as many as U.S. soldiers that have been killed in Iraq and Afghanistan. But the second, I think, more fundamental point that I would make, if I had to identify the largest psychosis gripping the 20th century, it would be American consumerism and the ideology of neoliberalism.
Yeah.
And I say this because, you know, there's an extraordinary mass delusion that has gripped the elites of virtually every country in the world, that the neoliberal economic theories first popularized by Ronald Reagan and Maggie Thatcher in the 1970s and 1980s, which were basically have declared war on the public sector, have unleashed greed, capital accumulation at any cost around the world, and are now, as we know in the United States and Europe, beginning to consume the Western countries in the same way that they've been consuming third world countries for decades and in some cases centuries, and now are exemplified and personified most egregiously, almost obscenely, by Donald Trump. And I think, you know, for me, the reason why we're as Einstein says, we've changed everything in the world and accept our state of consciousness. You know, it's easy for us to look back on the Nazis or look back on Stalin or Maoist China, etc., and identify a small mote in the other person's eye and not see that our entire culture, predicated metaphysically, as you describe it, on a metaphysic of separation, but at an economic and political level, predicated on a mass consumerism and an objectivization of people as consumers and the public sphere as sort of the enemy, that we don't even question. Most Americans don't see that they're actually participating in the most massive psychic delusion of them all. That what's going to take the planet out is not people kind of killing isolated individuals. It's a way of being in the world, a consumerist orientation that we affirm because it makes us comfortable, until we've taken ourselves off the cliff and are being consumed by a catastrophe not generated because we're killing people, but because we're decimating and denigrating people and planet the world over in a mindless way that is supported by mass advertising, the political structures of our time, our educational system, our economic system. And so anyway, I just wanted to add that to me, that is the biggest psychosis of them all. And we're in the middle of it.
In the middle of it. But the reason that that psychosis exists is because we've lost the deep ground. So it's a compensation. And the more we lose the ground, the more the compensation comes. I must have that sausage, or I must have this and the car, or whatever.
Very good point.
It grows in a secular society. It can also grow in a religious one, maybe in the Baptist belt in America, I don't know. But it comes from matter devouring us because we've neglected the feminine principle of relationship. You see what I mean? If you turn it around that way, we're being devoured and consumed, thinking that we're consuming, by what we've rejected or ignored. And I think Marie-Louise von Franz, Jung's colleague, said that when the feminine principle is unconscious, it manifests as the will to power. So all that consumerism is the will to power over life, really. We grab what we can when we can. We've exported it to China, we've exported to Russia, Africa, wherever. And also, I did put in one of my lists of the 20th century, I put the rise of America to a world power. And that was one of the big problems, because the minute it saw itself as we're the greatest, we're going to rule the world, it was a fatal delusion, if you like. it began to spread that need for power into South America, into the Far East, into wherever it could get its hands on. It's got over 100 bases all over the world now. So that too is a kind of consumerism. It's a greed for power. And I think that was very marked in the American psyche, particularly from Reagan onwards, but particularly with Bush Jr. and now, of course, with Donald Trump. But it's a continuous pattern.
Yes.
And it's getting stronger and stronger and worse because you get more and more of a demagogue ruling the whole huge country. And people have forgotten the wonderful thing that I read out to the Constitution, that pursuit of, they've taken it literally, happiness is the pursuit of material goods instead of the kingdom of heaven, or what you like. I totally agree with you, but I don't agree with you about Islamic State or ISIS or ISIL or whatever you want to call it, because if they got control of the world, they would have killed any number of people that they could get their hands on. Anyone who didn't get converted to Islam, in their view of Islam, they would have killed. And they have done it in the past anyway in certain societies.
Yeah, in terms of their intent, you're absolutely correct.
Yeah.
I was just making a comment on their scope, their current
right.
scope. They've been relatively self-contained.
Had a chance. Thank God.
Yeah. By the way, Amy Blumenschein has just added a note that it's not 100 U.S. bases around the world. It's more like 800.
800, okay. I'm asking.
Thank you, Jim, for your contribution.
Thank you, Jim.
Now let's hear from Paolo.
Hello, hi. So thanks again for such an awakening call. It literally raised my vibration. So I have two sets of questions. One may be a bit theoretical and simplistic, and which I'll start with. So if the world is a reflection of our consciousness, in principle, if we are capable of shifting our consciousness, we should be able to change our world, at least the reality we see. So the question here is, how big and participated needs to be the shift of consciousness to change our individual world?
Okay, well, Ken Wilber, you know the philosopher Ken Wilber?
Yeah.
He says we need 1% of the world's population in order to affect this shift of consciousness. If 1%, that's 700 million, wake up, then it will happen automatically, because we affect the ground, so to speak. As the ground is affected by us, so the ground changes and manifests different forms of life or manifestation. So it really depends on activating that number of people, I think, in some way, to bring it about. Mm-hmm. And certainly the younger generation are waking up to the dangers of climate change and beginning to speak about it, like the little Swedish girl. So I think that there's hope there of a change of consciousness. And there's certainly a huge change. Even in my lifetime, I'm now, since I was 25, I'm now 87. There's an enormous change in values and things like becoming aware of child abuse, for instance, or the whole gay scene, accepting homosexuality. That's a huge change after centuries and centuries of persecution. So there's certain things that have changed, but there's a great deal more from the point of view of the planet that we need to do. What's your second question?
Yeah, the second question is, and thank you for your answer, Anne. Second question is, how deep is this crisis? Meaning, is it only affecting this human dimension? Or so that once we died, we are saved from this crisis of this world, since we are passing on to another reality? Or do we carry it along with us, who are souls, if we don't solve it here?
I think we probably carry it with us. We may have to come back to do more work, or we may have to go on to somewhere else and continue something that we should have done here. I can't answer that question. It's too deep and too difficult, really. But I do know that we're being helped by people on the other side, people who've gone on, who are doing their best to wake us up. And then I've got at least 6 friends over there who are doing their best and who help me with my writing, who say, you know, say this and say that and think about this, think about that, or you've left out this, that sort of thing. So I think it's an ongoing collective endeavor between the people on the planet and the people in other dimensions. It's really, we're all connected anyway, so what happens here will affect them there and vice versa. And for instance, with the near-death experience, all those people who've spoken out about that, they've changed many people's perception of death and dying and made people less frightened and everything. So those are contributions which are very important and are changing. It's just that we take an awfully long time to change in view of the urgency of the situation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paulo. Thank you. Now we have Miriam Sayad. Let's turn to you.
Hello, Miriam.
Hello, hello. And I agree with Paulo. That lecture really raised my vibration. I mean, it just brought incredible peace into my body and my heart. And so I know that there was a lot of truth there because of that. So thank you. Georgie, thank you for holding space so beautifully all this time. Jim, for your extraordinary fire and passion, and everyone. Actually, I think Jim and Paulo kind of answered, kind of brought up what I wanted to talk about. So you may have answered this already. You mentioned how in the 20th century, a lot of the difficulties of the 20th century came from having utopian ideals.
Ideologies. Yes.
Ideologies, utopian and calling for revolution.
Mm.
And so to me, that obviously signals that we shouldn't be calling for revolution, that the shift that you're talking about, that we're wanting, is not in any way sounding like those same calls to revolution that we've encountered before.
You're quite right, but what will happen if we don't act is that revolutions will come up, right or left-wing parties or groups will come up with great violence, because it will be acted out at that level if we don't lift it to the level that we want it to be on, so to speak. If we don't do something, then the gap will be filled by these ideologies again, because that's the human tendency, is when things reach a certain level or certain pitch, the anger in the unconscious breaks out because it can't go anywhere else, so to speak. So it gets out into revolutions, and leaders come up who will lead revolutions.
So what do we do though when
we do what we're doing, which is a growing thing all over the world, like we're doing now, communicating, because what we're doing at this level, we're drawn to connect with people who are working at the same level for the first. That's very important, that life will bring us to the people we're meant to be meeting and working with. We don't need to worry about that. Like life brought me to Jim, for instance, or Jim to me, and to Georgie, and people like Erwin Laszlo, who I've known for years. I've been working for 30 years, and all these people are knowing each other, forming a group. And the Sufis as well. They have their own group, and they're working with people all over the world to do the same thing. So we can only do what we can do. We can't move mountains. Although we have great power, we have more power than we have any idea of. And we just simply have to ask to be guided, in the old sense, in every religion, ask for the guidance, and the guidance will come, definitely.
See, more heart-centered response from you.
Absolutely. And
I will miss you next week, all of you.
Oh, yes, I said the same thing to her before we started. Thank you so much for joining us. Yeah, let's do another one, and let's do another one. We have 2 more people. Do you mind if we go over time a little bit, Anne? We have 2 more people. Thank you very much. Magdalena.
Hi, everybody. Wow, of course, I have to echo everybody. My energies where I was doing like a little dance while you were talking, because it was very, very energetic. and such beautiful, inspiring words. So I'm worried, like everybody else. I feel the crises and all the problems that we have around the world, but I'm also extremely energized and motivated. And of course, everything you're saying, I'm relating it to the work that I do. And I was very touched by your emotion in regards to the words of Thomas Paine about the rights of man, and that we're all created equal and we're endowed with rights, and that this is self-evident. And I'm a human rights scholar and advocate and activist. And so I believe that we are doing it. We are creating this consciousness, and the human rights are about creating relationships and connections and human treatment. But also human rights have evolved in a way that isn't always connected to this broader knowledge. So human rights are seen as a source of reason. They're secular, and they are disconnected from emotions. And what I try to do is I try to, in my research, bring that wholeness back, that human rights really are, as Thomas Paine said, self-evident, because they are in our nature, and we're bringing it back.
Yeah.
And that they are connected to our emotions, and our emotions are in fact leading us in cooperative ways to treat each other and love each other and act towards each other with justice. And they are, and the source of these rights are in fact from spirituality, that they're not just these secular ideas that we came up with, but they are coming from spirit directly. So I suppose I just wanted to say that to let you know that I'm very touched with everything that you're saying. And I suppose my question is, can we talk more amongst ourselves about exactly this and continue this wonderful discussion as we create this new story together?
Well, I think that depends on Jim, really, and I haven't got time in my life. I'm too busy to do more than an hour a week or something like that. But I can't really engage with people. I haven't got the energy for that. I can do a talk and give it and listen and answer questions, but I don't know that I could actually do any more. But we'll see. Anyway, we'll see, because I've still got plenty of energy. But I think that you're absolutely right to stress the need to connect it with the heart, because that's where it comes from. And it comes with that beautiful diagram, I think, about the values of the heart, compassion, love, justice. They come from deep, deep within us. They come from the universe. They're not just secular niceties, if you like. They're definitely great principles, great human principles that the Greeks knew about, the Egyptians knew about. So there we are. You go on with your work.
Thank you.
There you have it, Magdalena. Just get on with it.
We're doing it.
Thank you. Well, the last question from Lenita Newberg.
I think I have a question, but it's not yet formed. It at least comes from a feeling that very often when I think about the feminine from at least my history, it's much more of an emphasis on the gentle feminine. And I'm feeling much more of a need, at least personally and professionally, to grow my mother bear facet. And I'm wondering if you have any direction there or gut response in terms of your belief about the need for the feminine now going forward.
Well, it's very complex, because the feminine can get bogged down in false masculinity, if you like. It can, in a strident voice which says, unless you do what we say, this, that, and the other. This is going on in England very much, for instance, in the universities, which have shut down any discussion because they can't bear to be faced with something opposite to what they're thinking about. So there, the feminine is needed in the sense of relationship. They should listen to what the other is saying. Cambridge University has just barred, what's his name, Peterson, that Canadian philosopher, from teaching in Cambridge because he was photographed with somebody wearing an anti-Islamist something or other. So that's an example of not following the feminine, not really honoring the relationship. And they'd invited him. Now they've banished him, saying he can't come. So you have to watch what these people are saying and what you're doing. There's a lovely book called Women Who Run with the Wolves, which you might like to read. Have you read it already, Lenita?
Several times, yes.
You have, okay. Well, she's quite good with the strong feminine there. But you just have to balance it. I mean, I'm getting stronger now than I ever was when I was 40. But I can speak now because I have the authority to speak. I'm old enough without being told to shut up. I can say my piece like I've just done today. Whereas I couldn't at 40 or 50 or even 60, had to wait. So there's a time for everything. You have to wait till the time is right. But if your voice is meant to speak, then you must speak and, you know, take it into the community while you're still able to walk and talk. Yeah,
Thank you.
That's another thing. I think Paolo said somewhere that were we going to see the pictures? But isn't everybody going to get this transmission with the videos and everything?
Yeah. Yes. Georg is going to send it out after this session. Yeah.
That's lovely. Well, thank you for your question, Lenita. I very much understand it. Thank
you, Lenita. So just wanted to tell you all before I share my closing words that Anne put together an extra, I think it's 11 pages document for you, and she kindly asked not to share it with anybody because they are sensitive information in the document, sensitive in a sense that she mentioned the work of Chris, I don't know how to say his surname, Beisch, yes. And his book is not published yet. I can't wait to read it really. And Christopher gave permission to Anne to include some paragraphs from his new book. So that is that sensitive material, besides lots of other things. But I'd like to read just one paragraph from your amazing book, but this time it is from David Corton. And this is what he said. Through the stories we share, we define what it means to be human, our place in creation, our responsibilities to one another and Earth, and the possibilities it is within our means to actualize. The issues are revealed with particular clarity by playing out the implications of two sharply contrasting stories. One story is that of a dead universe that assumes matter is the sole reality and consciousness but an illusion. This is the standard story of contemporary Western science. The other is the story of a living universe that takes consciousness to be the primary reality. This is a new story emerging as a synthesis of ancient traditions, religious wisdom, and data of the scientific leading edge, and it is potentially changes everything.
That's a lovely quote.
Well, you quoted it in your book, so I found it equally amazing. Thank you so much, Anne. And as I said before, thank you so much on behalf of Ubiquity University that you spared 4 sessions with us, and you have shared your knowledge and amazing wisdom. I certainly learned a lot. A big thank you to Georg for facilitating the Zoom platform and so seamlessly. Thank you so much, Georg, and thank you to all attendees and for contributing. And please check our website. We have exciting courses and degree programs, and hope to see you soon. And now it's back to you, dear Anne, for the final words before we finish.
I think I would just say to everyone, thank you for listening. Thank you for being there, because every writer needs an audience. If there's no audience, you can't write or speak or communicate. If there's any particular things any of you want to ask about how, you know, where you're going or what you're doing, you can write a short email to me and I will reply. But it has to be something specific. But just trust your own guidance, because we're all guided, and this guidance is getting stronger all the time because there are more people listening to it. So just follow your own intuitive guidance, your heart, what your feeling is leading you towards. HeartMath website, heartmath.org, I think is very helpful in the connection with the heart. And there are all sorts of things on the internet that are helpful. So I just wish you all well and wish you good fortune in your lives and great futures, which I hope we all have.
Yes, certainly. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye,
you,
Tim.
Anne. Thank you, Georgie.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.